Welcome back to the Joe Walsh Show. We begin with a look at today's Supreme Court ruling on that internet sales tax, who wins and who loses. Then the outrage of the night, the demonization of a former NBA basketball player who simply wanted to hear the president speak. And then we'll have part two of my interview with Colonel Oliver North. But we begin today, right now, this half hour, with this Supreme Court ruling today on the online sales tax. To discuss this issue, I'm joined by Eric Boehim. He's with Reason Magazine. Eric, I appreciate your time. Thanks, man, for joining me. So this is an issue I'm having a hard time wrapping my arms around. This ruling today allowing states to tax online retailers. Eric, give me your overall thought on the ruling.
Yeah, that's right. This is the ruling in, this is South Dakota v. Mayfair, and this overturns actually a couple different Supreme Court precedents, but the most important one was set back in the early 90s, back when catalogs were a big thing. You remember catalogs, right, Joe? We used to order things via catalog and shipped to us. And the Supreme Court ruled back then that states couldn't tax those shipments. They couldn't tax the purchases that somebody made in their house out of a catalog unless, the warehouse or unless the actual physical object was coming from that same state. They had to have, the key word was nexus. You had to have nexus in the state in order to apply sales tax to that. Now, this is something that states have been looking to overturn for years now, because online sales are such a huge thing. It's obviously blown what used to be catalog sales out of the water. And so this ruling today seems to open the door for states. It was a ruling, on behalf of South Dakota, but opens the door for all states to more aggressively tax online purchases. So, Christmas this year just got a little more expensive.
So, Eric, I'm as anti-tax as anybody, so I think that's why I don't like this ruling. I hear the argument on the other side that it's almost a fairness issue to the businesses, the brick and mortar businesses in these states. Is it that simple, though? What's your take?
I mean, I think there's something to that argument, and like you say, I'm willing to take that argument to a certain point, not all the way, right? Like, I think online sales have a number of advantages over brick and mortar retailers. I think if there's any brick and mortar retailer out there that thinks, yes, this Supreme Court decision today is going to save our business or, bring people back to the local mall, that's just not reality. But yeah, I think there is ultimately something of a fairness issue there. But at the same time, this really becomes now is going to be a fight in state capitals where people are going to have to let their voices be heard. People on the other side of it, not just the brick and mortar retailers, but all consumers really will have a chance to weigh in. What I'm worried about is, look, a lot of states are hard up for cash, right? They don't have a lot, they've spent more money than they have. And they're always scrounging around looking for new sources of revenue, whether that's gas taxes or hotel taxes. And now this just drops in their lap. I'm worried that state lawmakers are going to have a field day with this.
Well, you're right, Eric. A state where I'm from, Illinois, is strapped for cash. Who loses? Who loses with this ruling today?
Well, I think everybody who buys something online loses in some small way. We're all going to be paying more in taxes, and I think this is, I think maybe Amazon, maybe some of the big online retailers lose some small percentage, but I think the big losers here really are your small online retailers, your people who have, maybe bigger than like an Etsy shop or something like that, but somebody who makes T-shirts and sells them online, a small business that maybe, operates basically the same model of what a mom and pop Main Street retailer might be, but they do that online. Not everybody, Amazon is not the only player out there on the internet. There are lots of other places where you can buy and sell things on the internet, and that's now states are going to have to be very careful when they write these tax rules, because I think you do end up advantaging the really big online retailers at the expense maybe of some of the smaller competitors who, they're never going to be Amazon, but they should at least have a fair shot at being in business.
How are they going to, Eric, how are they going to do that? You're right. I think of these mom and pop online retailers, all the compliance now, taxes, different tax structures in all of these states. Just logistically, how would that be possible for these small guys?
Well, I think that's a great question. That's a question that a lot of those small online retailers are certainly asking themselves now, and that's something that that state lawmakers are going to have to grapple with, and hopefully will realize that Amazon's not the only game in town. I think the other loser too is just sort of federalism as a principle, right? And Joe, you probably I don't want to assume anything on your behalf, but I mean you're probably a fan of federalism, a fan of states being able to write their own rules, as am I. And I think we sort of lose that too, that you kind of lose another one of these federalist principles of the Constitution here in this ruling, because it is potentially really sweeping, does really change the game for the for the whole country, for online retailers. And then I think maybe the other side of that argument would be that that the old rulings back in the 90s that said states couldn't do this, maybe that was an attack on federalism too. I don't know. But this fits into, I think, the trend that we saw with the Supreme Court with the sports gambling decision of a couple of weeks ago too, of just saying, look, we're going to let states kind of make their own rules on this. Maybe I would hope that states will look at this, and some of them at least will say that's not a route we want to go. We don't want to tax online sales. We don't want to put that burden on our businesses.
Hey, Eric, help me articulate the best argument against what the Supreme Court ruled today. Again, I despise any and all taxes. To me, this is just more taxation. What's your best argument against what the Supreme Court did today?
Well, I think I'm not a lawyer. I'm not one of the lawyers who argued in front of the Supreme Court, so I don't know about a legal argument, but I would certainly say that I think in looking at the world that we're going to be living in now after this Supreme Court argument, I think the argument that I would make to state lawmakers is to say that these taxes are not necessarily, to basically try to not fall victim to the fairness argument that's going to be brought on the other side, and to say that we have to look at the whole picture in terms of where people are buying and selling things in your state, and it's not just a matter of applying a tax to people who were previously untaxed, but it really is a question of, I think it goes back to that old Supreme Court precedent from 91 or 92, the question of nexus. Does a business, can you really apply taxes to a business that isn't really in any way, shape, or form operating in your state? That means Illinois, for example, Joe, they need a lot of money. This means that you're going to have, businesses in Missouri, in Indiana, in Kentucky that make sales into Illinois, potentially having to deal with Illinois compliance, Illinois tax compliance. So depending on what happens from here, you could end up with a real patchwork of maybe 50 different online sales tax systems in 50 different states. Who knows? Maybe we'll end up with fewer than that. Maybe there'll be some sort of streamlining that goes on. But, I think there really is a tremendous burden there that you're potentially putting on a lot of small businesses, and even big businesses. I mean, Amazon isn't going to want to deal with 50 different state sales tax systems too. So I think the best argument here is probably to say, don't just look at it as a windfall of cash for your state, but really carefully consider what this means and who ultimately is going to be paying these taxes, which are the consumers. At the end of the day, we're the only ones who actually pay taxes.
And Eric, when it comes to this world of online retail, just a broad question: how should we tax these online retailers? Should we tax them? Is this just a different animal that we ought to leave alone?
Yeah. I think again, this is an issue that I think lots of states have solved in kind of different ways. I was always pretty comfortable with this nexus theory that was sort of built up around this 1992 Quill Supreme Court decision, where sure, if there's a warehouse in your state, maybe that means those that's the equivalent of the Macy's or the Sears or whatever that you might have been applying sales tax to before. And sales taxes, I think, relative to other forms of taxation are pretty fair, certainly more fair than some income taxes can be, or payroll taxes that fall more heavily on one end or the other. Sales tax, everybody pays the same percent. If you buy more, you pay more, right? So maybe that's another route states could go here, is they could say, all right, we're going to get more money from online sales tax now. We should look to use that to offset maybe some of our less fair taxes, maybe our property taxes or our income taxes. Every state's different. They'll all have to do that calculation on their own. But I think that's, maybe that's another way states could look at this.
Going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. Eric, I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Coming up,
certainly will. Thank you, Joe.
A Trump fan demonized for being a Trump fan.